Hi, my name is Matias,
And I'm Thomas.
and we're going to explain to you what is a vector and how to measure a vector.
So first off, what is a vector? A vector is a measurement with both magnitude and direction. How can you identify a vector from a scalar? A scalar just has magnitude with a unit, while a vector has direction. How can a vector be represented? A vector is typically represented by an arrow with head and tail. How can we determine the magnitude of the vectors? If the vector is in component form, then we can use a Pythagorean theorem to find the magnitude. Some vectors are represented by the magnitude and directions, and in that case, the magnitude is evident.
Okay, so what is a vector component and when should we find it? A vector component is a part of a vector that corresponds to a dimension. When we are trying to add vectors, it is very useful to find their components and then add components wise. When the vector counts with a slope, then we can find a component. So how do trigonometric figures help determine the components of of vectors? If we have the direction and magnitude of a vector, then we can think of the components as sides of a right triangle with the magnitude of the vector being the hypotenuse. From this perspective, trigonometric functions help us find these sides which correspond to the components. Based on the position of the angle, we can find the component. Okay, so I'm gonna explain two examples, which are very simple. In this case, we have a vector it has a 10 feet magnitude and a 45-degree north of west, and it would look something like this. And then when you find the measurements, you just have to use a sine to find the measurements. And another example would be a vector has a magnitude of 10 feet, but at this time it has 45-degree angle and from north to west. In this case, it would look like this. And we have to use cosine to find both of the sides. Okay, so if we have two real life examples, we could use a plane leaves the airport on the bearing 45 degrees traveling at 400 miles per hour. The wind is blowing at a bearing of 135 degrees at a speed of 40 miles per hour. What is the actual velocity of the plane? So if we find both of these measurements and we find both of these measurements, we can then subtract them so we can know how much the plane moved. In this case, it moved this much. So therefore, the velocity is 401.98 miles per hour at a bearing of 50.71 degrees. And then another real life example would be an airplane is heading due north at an airspeed of 700 kilometers per hour, but there's a wind blowing from the east at 60 kilometers per hour. How many degrees of course will the plane fly? So if we have this, we already know the hypotenuse and we already know the adjacent with the opposite angle, the opposite side. So we have to find this angle. By using that, we know that we have to use tangent. So we do tangent inverse and we get this angle, which therefore the angle that the airplane went off course is 4.9 degrees. I hope this video helped you to understand vectors and how to find their measurements. And if you have questions, please email us. Thank you.